In the name of the incarnate Son of God, amen. So what can I believe? What can you believe? Suppose a friend tells you there's a sale at Staples today. They have iPads at 10 cents a piece. Now, you trust your friend, but you have to ask, are you sure? Did you see it yourself? Is there some trick to it? Is there some qualification like the first 5 customers or until noon yesterday, or if you buy 5, 6 packs of beer first? I mean, we just instinctively, out of long experience, weigh what we hear by a number of factors. We balance the outlandish claim against our past experience, against importance to us, against what we know about the real world, against probabilities of all various sorts. And then we believe, or not, depending. If someone tells you later today that Donald Trump has announced his candidacy for 2024, I expect you'll believe that, no questions asked. Some things are not a surprise. So what can I believe, and how firmly can I believe it? I think these are fundamental questions that we deal with daily. But St. Thomas, in today's gospel reading, was asked to believe something on which life depends, and on 3 grounds. First, what he heard from others. Secondly, what he could see for himself. And thirdly, what he could actually touch. 3 senses: hearing, seeing, feeling. The first sense, hearing, he was sure was not enough. I don't think it ever is when something is important. Hearsay evidence doesn't carry much weight, and it shouldn't. No one is going to be asked to testify in the Derek Chauvin trial about what someone told them. No, they want to know what people saw with their own eyes. I remember a news report back when Barack Obama was running for president for the first time, and reports were being spread that he was a Muslim. And a television reporter was shown asking some men in a Midwestern diner who they would vote for and why. And one of them said, well, he couldn't vote for Obama because Obama was a Muslim. And the reporter said, well, but he isn't a Muslim. And the man in the diner said, but that's what I've heard. Well, hearing's not very reliable, and Thomas knew that. And Thomas wasn't about to rely on hearing, nor was he even ready to be satisfied by seeing. Seeing's believing is the old saying, but any magician knows that the hand is quicker than the eye, and we can think that we see something that's not really there at all. In an age when virtual reality is a familiar idea, when we can project holographic images and show somebody as present who actually is in Bangladesh, when we can go to the movies and be shown special effects that are totally unreal and untrue, seeing is not believing. And the result is that touch and feel become more important than ever. And especially because of what we are as human beings. I am a flesh and blood, material human being. I may see things, I may hear things, I may imagine things, but it's touch that brings me into relationship with what I am, flesh and blood, material, capable of banging into things, being hurt by a collision. That's reality as we experience it. That's what we can be sure of, what we can believe. When I pound on the pulpit, which I can't do on Zoom, unfortunately, and don't often do anyway, I know this is real, it's here, I can feel it. So this story about Thomas tells us several things, but one that's important is the place of the sacraments in our lives. Our worship is not just sight and sound, as some worship is. We don't go to church just to listen and maybe sing, as some worshipers do. We go to taste and touch and feel. If I were an evangelical, I'd get along a lot better with Zoom than I do as an Episcopalian, as a Christian in the Catholic tradition. I want sacraments. I want to be wholly involved. Hearing, yes, but also tasting and touching and feeling. To make new members in the church, we don't just announce it, we pour water over them. We don't just pronounce two people, husband and wife. We join their hands at the altar and wrap a stole around their hands. As soon as possible, we will once again use bread and wine to know Christ's presence here. Jesus says to us, as he said to Thomas, reach out your hand and feel this bread, touch my body, and know that I am with you still. Christianity is about God's relationship with the material world. At the center of our faith is the fact that God came into this material world, that God created, and that God lived a human life in real flesh and blood. Our faith is an incarnational faith. God is real for us in a way that no other faith can claim. God took human flesh, became real for us in the ultimate way. And the celebration of Easter is a celebration of the resurrection of that flesh, that human body. I keep meeting people who think that Christians believe in the immortality of the soul. And I guess some do, but that's not what the Creed says. The Creed says it's about the body. Creed says it's the resurrection of the body, not about a soul that we can't even see or hear, let alone touch. It's about a reality that we can understand, that's tangible, that we can touch and taste and feel. Easter is not about spiritualism. It's about materialism. Spirituality is very popular these days, but fewer people are going to church. Spirituality is what it is, but Christian faith is something much more. I like to quote the former Archbishop of Canterbury, William Temple, who once said, Christianity is the most materialistic of the world's religions. And it is. It's a religion that has to do with God here, that has to do with God present with us, and therefore concerned with flesh and blood and with problems of poverty and hunger. It's not a religion of escapism. So I could simply preach about the sacraments today and how central they are to the Christian faith. But what I want to do is look more deeply into the whole question of matter and spirit and ask what we mean anyway by that classic division between spiritual and material. And what I want to suggest is that this standard division we make so easily between material and spiritual is really completely out of date in a post-Einstein world. I don't believe we know anymore where the border is between the physical and spiritual, or if there is one. When scientists talk about quarks and mesons and subatomic particles and fields of force and dark matter, whatever that may be, and yet they claim it's the commonest substances in the universe, though it's undetectable by human intelligence. Where would you draw the line then between what's physical and what's not? The prayer book defines a sacrament as an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace, as if there were two kinds of reality, the material one that you can taste and touch, and the spiritual one that you can't. And in the Middle Ages, there was a clear line between material and spiritual, and everything had to be one or the other. And Christianity, with its talk about incarnation and sacraments, tried to cross that line, but it still left us in a divided world in which the things that we knew about from everyday experience were the material things, while the things that mattered were the things that we couldn't know directly, the so-called spiritual things. But, we live after Einstein, and we know that the material world is not all that solid. The solid walls of your house, we now know, are made up of atoms that are made up of electrons, and even smaller particles like mesons composed of quarks and antiquarks and more, some of which we know only as theory and have never really seen and certainly not touched. And worse than that, not only is there no way to taste or touch or see the ultimate elements, but they can be turned into immaterial energy. Because as we all know, E equals mc squared, and mc squared equals E, I guess. And the wood of the pew that you would sit on in church can be burned and become heat energy. And the energy of the sun can be transformed into green plants that push up out of the soil. And worse than that, the material universe includes what science calls forces that are not material at all. We all know about gravity, but then there's the electromagnetic force, and there are two types of nuclear force. And at the cutting edge of science, you actually find them using terms like weird and spooky as technical terms, as the scientists try to reduce the material world to something they can understand. But the physical world keeps escaping from their experiments and leading them out into a world that sometimes seems more spiritual than material. Because what kind of world is it in which scientists use terms like weird and spooky? I saw a book review in the New York Times some while back that talked about wildly imaginative new ideas about the basic structure of matter. Wildly imaginative. It said the fundamental problem with these ideas is that there's no way to test them. But science is about testing. And if you can't test it, how can it be science? So the boundary between the material and the spiritual seems to have disappeared, which takes us back to Thomas, because that was Thomas's problem too. And the problem of the Christian church when it tried to understand and to explain the resurrection and the Eucharist and the sacraments. But isn't that what we should have expected to learn as we explored God's world? Shouldn't we have expected to learn that it was all one, and that the hard rock in the garden is simply one more expression of the ultimate reality, which is God? I mean, isn't love one form of reality and rocks another? And aren't both of them evidence of the creativity of the same God? When we take the bread of the Eucharist in our hands, that too can be analyzed as matter. It's composed of flour and water, but those ingredients are composed of atoms and atoms of carbon and hydrogen and so on, which is potential energy, because if you burn it, heat is created. If you eat it, the body absorbs the energy. The bread is material, it's physical, but that means it's also potential energy, and it's transformed into energy when we eat it. But if you come here with faith, you see, there's another kind of energy at work as well, as Christians have always known, even though they often disagreed as to just what that energy is or how to define it. But whatever language you want to use, it has to do with the way in which God comes to us, Christ comes to us in our worship and prayer, renewing our lives by his life. So you, a child of God, are joined with God, and your life is renewed. Now, Thomas knew all that when he tried to understand what the other disciples were telling him, and he thought he had it all figured out. His world, like so many of ours, was material, and that was it. He thought that when a body died, that was an end of it. But you see, Thomas didn't know about Einstein. Thomas didn't really understand that the world is one, that God is one, and that all life and matter and creation exist only because of God. And there are no boundaries except the ones that we make in our own heads. Thomas, you might say, was the original scientist, doubting and questioning and looking for the proof. And that's what he was made to do. It's what all of us were made to do. God made us to do that. God made us to explore and to test and to question. And eventually, perhaps only hereafter, also to understand. But it's part of our job as human beings to question. We're here to explore and to learn and to grow in our understanding of the mystery of life. And if we're doing that at all well, we ought to be better prepared than Thomas was, to understand that bodies can be raised and life can be transformed, that the pieces of bread that were given at the altar are not simply a mystery beyond understanding, but just one more of those many places where the simple divisions break down and the things that separate us from God are overcome, and the material, if we still want to use that language, reveals the spiritual, reveals deeper levels of the dimensions of God's creation. If you read about saints and poets, it's surprising, I think, how often they see evidence of God, not in some great burst of light and glory, but in the simple material things. a rock, a stream, a daffodil, a leper. And a sacramental faith should do that for us. It should send us out into a world the great English poet Gerard Manley Hopkins described as charged with the grandeur of God. The world, he said, is charged with the grandeur of God. I go for a walk every afternoon if I can, and sometimes I stop to take out my iPad and take a picture of someone's small front yard garden, the glory of God in the sunset. I don't take a picture, but I see God also in an occasional homeless person huddled against a wall on Noriega or 9th Avenue. God present in the pain of this world, as well as the glory. So we need to go out from the church when we get back into it again, out from our homes after this time of prayer, with eyes opened like Thomas's, to see God again and again in this world God made, in this world that God entered, and to say again and again the same words that Thomas said, my Lord and my God. In the name of the incarnate God, amen.